There is nothing wrong with your YouTube player. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. I am now in control. I control the horizontal and the vertical. I can delude your image with a lot of cute cat pictures and the same old tired meme you've seen on the internet reused over and over again and beyond. For the next hour or so, however long this ends up being, I will control everything that you see and hear. Unless, of course, you turn off the video or, look away from your screen, but whatever. You are about to experience the awe and mystery that reaches from the deepest inner minds to a review of The Outer Limits. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Outer Limits 1990s version, Season 2. This video is a part of a series of videos where I cover every episode of the 90s The Outer Limits, one season at a time. In this video, I will cover every episode of Season 2 of The Outer Limits. So, as I talked about in my Season 1 review, this is the first time I'm covering a show where I have not seen every episode. But I talked about in Season 1 how, like a decade ago, I had rented the DVD, so I have seen all the episodes in Season 1. Not the case in Season 2. In fact, out of the 22 episodes that are in Season 2, I have only seen 6 of them before, to my knowledge. Maybe there's a couple I'm just not remembering well, but as far as I remember, there's only 6 out of 22 that I've actually seen. And out of those 6, there's a couple of them which I'm pretty sure I hadn't seen the whole thing. I just saw parts of it and only once, and I barely remember it. So it was a very different experience for me watching this season. It was almost all entirely new. And I found this season differs from Season 1 in that it's a lot more hit or miss. At one stage I was worried that this was a bad decision watching The Outer Limits, because I thought that this season was going to be really subpar and terrible. But then you get some great episodes, and I was like, okay, never mind, this is a great season, and you get more terrible episodes. So it kind of went back and forth for a little bit between like sort of your average, ooh, look at this sci-fi horror type thing, to actually original, powerful science fiction. So. And I do look on it, because I talk about my Season 1 review, how I used to look at this show as like very sort of elite and top quality. But watching, especially Season 2, it does seem like low budget syndicated sci-fi, which is, I guess, maybe I was a bit naive. I was a teenager in the 90s, is not how I originally viewed it, but that's fine. You can have low budget syndicated sci-fi. I mean, freaking Star Trek Next Generation was low budget syndicated sci-fi, so it can still be good and still be great, and you have a couple really great episodes in here. So enough of the preamble, let me just go ahead and jump into the episodes. Let's start with the first episode, the premiere episode of Season 2, which is A Stitch in Time. Now, for the longest time, I thought this was the finale of Season 1. I think right up until when I rented the DVD of Season 1, and I was expecting to see this episode, but it wasn't in it. I could have sworn it was in Season 1, but apparently it's Season 2. And I could have sworn there was another episode that was the premiere episode of Season 2, not this one, which I'll get to later. But, again, I was wrong. Apparently it's this one, which surprised me. Now, this episode of Stitch in Time features Amanda Plummer and Michelle Forbes, who both give amazing performances in the story of time travel, where a scientist who was abused as a child goes back in time and kills sexual predators or murderers before they murder women, thus saving the women's lives. But this takes a toll on her, and she starts to go a bit insane. And Michelle Forbes plays the police officer who investigates this. Who herself, she has a friend who was one of the victims of one of these murderers, who then comes back to life because of Amanda Plummer tampering with the timeline. So I had seen this episode before. To be honest, this is probably the episode of The Outer Limits I've seen the most. In fact, I saw it several times on syndication, and I got the DVD compilation of the time travel DVD, and this episode was on that. And frankly, it was my favorite episode of The Outer Limits. When it's primarily the main reason why I think this show is so great and why I want to rewatch the show. Whenever I think about how great this show is, this episode always comes to mind. And I showed this to a lot of people when I had the DVD. People had never seen or even heard of The Outer Limits, and I showed them this episode, and they were all blown away by it. It is the highest rated episode on IMDb, and I think for very good reason. Now, again, watching this episode was a bit of a different experience, because this is the episode that I've seen the most. I've seen this episode so many times, so it is kind of like more like watching a Star Trek show, where I've seen those a billion times, rather than most of the other episodes this season, which I haven't even seen once before. But I am reminded of just how great this episode is. It is really powerful in its commentary on victims of sexual assault, but also it uses the device of time travel in a very interesting way. And as I said, I absolutely love the performance by Amanda Plummer and Michelle Forbes. Now, Amanda Plummer's performance was very well noted, and a lot of people focus on that because it is quite amazing. But for me, I'm a huge fan of Michelle Forbes. And if you don't know who that is, she played Ensign Ro on Star Trek Next Generation. And whenever I see this actress, I think I'm happy to see her, because I think she does an amazing job. You know, the few times I had seen her, one of her most noted appearances is playing Admiral Kane on Battlestar Galactica, and just a couple of episodes. But yeah, I think she is a really underrated actress, and she should have done more in her career, because I think she's quite amazing. I think she is great in this episode, has sort of the jaded police officer, and we see, and she actually has to play like two different sides of this character, because she's a different character in the timeline in which her friend was never killed and still alive, and then by the end of the episode, she becomes sort of the crazy jaded one who starts to time travel, that was such a powerful ending. That was just such a knockout ending, because Amanda Plummer changed her past so that she never time traveled. So all those murderers that she killed were back to life again. So all the women that they killed were all dead again. So Michelle Forbes took over the role of going back and re-killing these people. Now, we see her at the end re-killing just that one killer who killed her friend, but I think it's kind of implied that she's going to sort of take on the mantle and continue killing all those other killers that she had to kill. It's a very nuanced ending, because it's a bit dark and twisted in one way, because it shows that in order to save these women's lives, you kind of have to sacrifice the mental well-being of one of the women. At first, it was Amanda Plummer, but she was sort of saved. Now she lives a happy life, but now Michelle Forbes has to sacrifice her mental well-being in order to save these women. It's a very interesting nuanced concept, and the way it was unfolded was just absolutely brilliant. Now, it did have this subplot, which I think was kind of obvious, with Michelle Forbes' partner, who was this nerdy guy, who obviously had a crush on her, and she was oblivious to it. Instead, she dated this asshole who was cheating on her, and so the obvious conclusion was that they should date each other. And in fact, when her best friend was brought back to life, that's what she really wanted to do. And it ends with her saying, "Oh, let's go out to a movie or whatever," but then she goes and travels back in time and kills people. So I don't know if it's really implying that she's going to have a happy ending with him. And yeah, the special effects and the music are a little bit dated, gotta be honest. But damn, I mean, I don't think there's much more to say. I think is the reason this is the highest rated episode on IMDb, and I think that it's gonna be pretty hard for any other episode to beat this to become my number one favorite episode of The Outer Limits, which I would say so far it is. It is just extremely powerful, and it is fascinating sci-fi to boot. On top of that, it's a great character story and good use of time travel. One of the best uses of time travel, not just in television, but in any visual medium. So yeah, it's one of the main reasons why I keep wanting to go back and watch The Outer Limits. Anyway, let's move over to the next episode, which I hadn't seen this episode before. It's called Resurrection. It's about apparently a distant future where humanity had been extincted, wiped itself out, but sort of androids or robots or whatever you want to call them, cybernetic organisms, they're completely mechanical. There's no biological side to them, so maybe they're not cybernetics, the incorrect term, but whatever. Androids had taken over the Earth, and they have their android society, and they have kind of outlawed human beings because human beings destroyed themselves, so they see them as destructive. But there's a couple of sort of religious, I would guess you'd call them, androids who want to bring humanity back to life, and so they fashion a human being in a lab in order to resurrect the species, and they're being hunted by the evil police robots that are against humanity. And eventually the human is being hunted throughout the episode, and eventually he manages to shut down all the robots everywhere, and thus ending their android society and beginning a new human one, because apparently they had created some other androids had created a woman. So you have the man and woman are now going to repopulate the human species, which scientifically you need more than just one man and one woman. I mean, you need a much wider genetic pool in order to repopulate the human species, but whatever. We'll just go with this. I'm surprised. I can't remember if they did this. I'm pretty sure they didn't, but I'm surprised they didn't say the woman would go, "Oh, my name's Eve," or something. And we already get the imagery. But I did like this episode. I think it was, again, it was a very interesting sci-fi concept, and those are actually the type of Outer Limits episodes I prefer, the ones that have more out there settings, like science fiction settings that are set on another world or a spaceship or the distant future or post-apocalyptic in this case, rather than just modern time, just some scientist creating some new invention. Those are the type of episodes I like a lot less. They tend to be more cheesy, and I'll get to a couple this season. And I'm damn sure, because I talked about how I watched The Outer Limits in syndication for a while, and I kept seeing the same episodes over and over again. And there's episodes like this, which I had never seen. So I am like 100% convinced that the syndication were just repeating the same episodes and skipping over a lot of episodes. But that's just me. So anyway, yeah. This episode was a bit cheesy, a bit on the nose, but overall, I enjoyed it. Alright, so then we get into the next episode, which is Unnatural Selection. This episode features Captain Harrison from the Enterprise B. I don't know, I'm a Star Trek fan. Most people actually recognize this actor more from Ferris Bueller. Yeah, so it's about this genetically engineering. Like, this couple wants to genetically engineer the woman's pregnant, so they want to genetically engineer the child before it's born, but it's illegal. But everyone else does it anyway. But there's also a disease that causes, sometimes they can backfire and cause them to go insane and eventually die and get deformed. And one of their neighbors had a kid who was like that, and so they changed their mind and decide not to do genetically engineering after they deal with this. And I just didn't like this episode. I just don't think it worked. You had shades of Gattaca, of course, but it wasn't done nearly as well. And of course, this episode came out before Gattaca. Yeah, I don't know. I just didn't find it very interesting. I just got bored with it. So that's pretty much all I'll say about that one. Next episode is I Hear You Calling. This is another episode that I had actually seen before in syndication. I think I'd only seen it once, but I had definitely seen it before. Featured Ali Sheehy, the 80's actress. I don't know what she's really been up to since then. But playing a reporter who overhears a conversation from a creepy alien about, let's see, I'm going to kill this. I can't remember, some corporate figure, and so she tries to report on this and no one believes her, and meanwhile the creepy alien's hunting her down, and then they find out at the end that he's actually the person he wanted to kill has actually contracted this alien virus, and he's actually not killing them. He's just sort of trying to sterilize and collect all the people infected because they could potentially wipe out humanity. So he's actually taking them back to his home planet to live out the rest of their lives. And because the reporter kept nosing around, she caught the virus as well, and so he ends up having to take her back as well. And the actor who played the creepy alien was the same guy who played Trevian on the Deep Space Nine episode The Quickening. Again, I'm reckoning Star Trek a lot, which is The Quickening is one of my favorite episodes of Deep Space Nine. So I've seen it a lot, so I recognize his actor a lot. In fact, so I couldn't help during this episode, every time he showed up, I would be like, Trevian, help me, Trevian. Anyway, I don't know. This episode's okay. I was going to say I don't like it, but it's decent episode. But the part of it that I don't like is I kind of knew they were going. I predicted, even though I've seen this episode before, but even if I hadn't, even when I first saw it, I predicted that the reporter, that was going to be the case where the creepy guy says, I'm going to kill this person, that the reporter's just that she's going to be wrong because she only heard part of the conversation. She doesn't have the context and she's jumping to conclusions. That seemed obvious to me. And it seems quite common of films and television of the 90s to sort of portray reporters in a very negative light, saying that they often jump to conclusions and their misreporting things can lead to a lot of people, going the wrong. It just portrays them in a very negative way, saying, reporters are bad and they mislead people and give them wrong information. They jump to conclusions and whatnot, which is a message I'm very much against, particularly in modern times now that we see that print media is dying. and social media is becoming more commonplace, and how the immense damage that's done to society and the entire political system, because novices who haven't an education, who are not obligated to vet their sources, are becoming more listened to than actual reporters who have been educated, who have to vet their sources, who have to go through all these things. So now we see just how important those kind of reporters are to society, and because they're marginalized, and because any idiot can shout out any random conspiracy theory with no evidence whatsoever and become the president of the United States as well, and shout out shit with no evidence whatsoever and be listened to, and just how damaging that is to society. So seeing this episode, which I knew is another jumping on the bandwagon of sort of demonizing reporters, I kind of think it aged very poorly, and I don't really care for that. But, the episode itself is fine, I guess. Next, we'll get into the next episode, which is Mind Over Matter, which, hey, it's Mark Hamill. Great to see Mark Hamill. This episode seems somewhat familiar to me, so maybe I had seen like parts of it before, I think, but not enough to like, I didn't see much of it. If I had seen parts of it, it was only like a couple minutes. Maybe I just saw like a clip. I think I might have saw on like a clip or something. Maybe there will be a one of those flashback clip show episodes. I know there's a couple more coming, so maybe one of them showed a clip from this episode. But anyway, so this episode's about they create this machine where they can go into someone's mind, and they're trying to use it to repair psychological damage. But one of the doctors that Mark Hamill has a crush on, who he was too shy to make a move on her, she gets in a car accident and becomes comatose. And so he goes in the machine to try to talk to her while she's in the coma. And other doctors warn him that this technology is too experimental. He's not even sure that that's an accurate representation of her subconscious, but he totally believes it is, and he falls in love with her, and they even have sex in the simulation. And this creepy demon keeps popping up over and over again, and he thinks that it's the machine itself who's kind of fallen in love with Mark Hamill, but then he finds out that what he thought was the woman actually turned out to be the creepy machine, and the creepy monster was the actual woman's subconscious trying to take her body back, and he ends up killing her because he thinks it's the machine, and the machine's like, oh, now we can be in love. Now, that ending was so goddamn predictable. I had predicted that ending like very, very early on in the episode, probably as soon as like they gave you enough information to know that there was something going on. Like as soon as they introduced that creepy, weird monster, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the actual woman, and that person he's talking to is just like the machine or something. And because it was too perfect. I mean, it's too obvious, because the way that she's like, oh, I love you. It's obviously that she was just saying what Mark Hamill wanted to hear. So, yeah, so I didn't like this episode. I thought it was the fact that it was so predictable and it was so cheesy, and you could see that Mark Hamill's character, he was supposed to be this brilliant scientist, but he was being so obtuse and blinded. And that twist ending, again, not only was it predictable, it was like too cheesy and over the top. The machine tricked you. I'm like, duh, of course it's a fucking machine tricked you. So, didn't really care for that episode. Anyway, speaking of episodes we didn't care for, this was an episode I definitely hadn't seen before. It's called Beyond the Veil. It's about a mental institution that treats patients who are suffering from the delusion that they've been abducted by aliens, and it follows one character in particular who believes he was abducted by aliens, and he sees the doctor, the main psychiatrist, who's played by the same actor who played Senator Vreenak on Deep Space Nine, he thinks that he's an alien. And then like the big twist ending after he goes through all these adventures and twisted stuff, and the doctor's treating him like shit and all this stuff, and the doctor like is antagonist towards his patients and particularly fucks with their heads and kind of tortures them a bit. And they reveal that he's not the alien, that is like some other administrator guy who barely appears in the episode is actually the alien. Dun dun dun. I fucking hate this episode. I thought it was absolutely terrible. First of all, it's so boring. It drags on too long. I just really wasn't paying attention, and I just wanted this to end. And secondly, it's a very unrealistic portrayal of what mental institutions are like. You can't have a doctor who treats his patients like that. He would be not disbarred, that's a lawyer thing, but he would be kicked out of his profession. I'm having a mind blank on what the medical term for that. But anyway, he would be kicked out of his profession. And it was just kind of, and it's obviously it was done for plot convenience, and it was kind of too like on the nose that they were trying to trick you into thinking that he was an alien. It was obvious that it was going to be someone else, and it turned out to be some other random dude who barely appears in the episode. So why do I care? I mean, why does it make it? And plus, like the ending, the guy ended up being trapped in the mental institution forever. So I really feel like there was really no point. There was no payoff to this episode whatsoever. I mean, other than that twist, which sucked and was beyond predictable, and who cares? So it felt like I trudged through this boring episode for no reason. It's a complete waste of time. I will say throughout the entire episode, I kept saying, "It's a fake!" That was probably the only enjoyment I got out of watching that episode. Every time that actor who played Senator Vreenak appeared, I was like, "It's a fake!" And so this episode was crap. Anyway, I'll get into the next episode, which is First Anniversary. It's another episode I didn't particularly care for. It had this one starred Matt Fewer, who Max Headroom, again making the Star Trek Next Generation connection. He was in the episode where he played the scientist from the future who actually turned out to be from the past, and so it's about them like being married to these really hot chicks, but it turns out that the hot chicks are really like ugly looking aliens, but they just have a disguise that makes the men that they marry think that they're hot, but the disguise like only lasts on a person for like a year, so eventually it wears off, and they start to slowly see that they're disgusting or whatever. And the alien's convinced that he really loves her and that he's going to continue to love her even after her disguise wears off. But of course, it's not the case. He starts to go a bit insane as he, piece by piece, she starts to smell, or she tastes disgusting, and then she starts to look disgusting. And once she finally reveals what she actually looked like, he freaks out and gets locked up in the mental institution. Again, this episode dragged a lot for me. Again, it was predictable. It was obvious. You knew what was going to happen. You knew that the guy wasn't going to love her, and you knew that he was going to go insane. So it just took a long time to get where exactly you knew it was going to go. So again, I kind of was bored with this. Didn't really see the point of it. I know that it's supposed to have some commentary about beauty and how people can't look beyond the simple aesthetics. But to be honest, yeah, sure. These men are being shallow, but the women are also, or the aliens are also being deceiving. And I could see how it could drive them a bit crazy, a bit insane, that they can't even trust their own senses, where they think they're seeing and feeling one thing and they slowly start to reveal that they're seeing something different. So for me, it's actually more of the deception rather than the fact that they're ugly that is more sort of maddening to them, especially since it's making them so they can't trust their own senses. It makes them go a bit insane. So that kind of undermines the whole beauty is more than just skin deep obvious message that this episode's trying to give. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually do believe that's a good message. In fact, there's been other TV episodes and other movies that have done this message correctly. This is not one of them. This does this message incorrectly. It kind of messes it up, and it messes up the delivery. And as I said, it was a bit boring and a slug to get through. So, yeah, not a particularly good episode either. So, we'll get to the next episode, which is Straight and Narrow. And I actually did like this episode a lot more. Actually, I thought this was a really good episode. So this dealt with a, delinquent or dysfunctional teenager who is, the son of a rich parents, and the rich mother makes him go to this boarding school or military school, and he doesn't really want to go, and he's being, oh, well, fuck you, I'm not going to be here, I just want to play in the band. And the boarding school ends up being run by these I don't know if conspiracy are trying to brainwash their students in order to use them as assassins and for hire. So they work for these corporations to sort of affect the business world and make them more money, and to sort of kill off their business opponents so that they earn more money, or to kill off politicians if they need be, if they're interfering with them making profits. And so they brainwash the kids and use them for that. And so all the kids at the school are completely brainwashed. But the main character actually has a condition. It was very sort of clunky dialogue that revealed he had this condition too. But anyway, he had a condition that made it so that the brainwashing didn't work on him, and he finds another student there who had the same condition, so the brainwashing didn't work on him. So they sort of team up to try to escape, but then they end up brainwashing the other guy anyway, and they try to brainwash him. He does escape, but he tries to save one of the politicians from being assassinated, but then he finds out when he goes to the police, finds out, the police were actually brainwashed by the same people too. So actually, as I said, I liked this episode. I did think it was a bit engaging throughout the journey, but one of the main reasons why I like this episode is the commentary, because I find that most shows and movies that deal with teenagers have the commentary of teenagers being, in fact, I'm thinking of one Stargate SG-1 episode that was something terrible at this, teenagers as just being dysfunctional and stupid and naive and just being assholes and disobedient just for the sake of it, and that's the way teenagers are. They're just disobedient, and those idiots need to smarten up and learn better, which, I agree that teenagers have a lot to learn, and they are a bit arrogant and act like, they know more than they actually do. I mean, we've all experienced that when we were teenagers. But personally, I think if most teenagers, if they're that dysfunctional or disobedient or delinquent or whatever, a lot of it has to do with the way that they're raised or the way they're treated, and that in society in general, too many adults, in the way we treat teenagers, we treat them too much like children, and don't actually listen to what they want or what they have to say. And that's what I think is directly responsible for this delinquent behavior. Not, of course, in all cases, but in many cases, I think it's the way we mistreat and mishandle teenagers that's the issue, not the teenagers themselves. And that's pretty much the message of this episode, because the mother was she just wanted to keep up appearance. She didn't actually care about her son. She just, because she was rich and she wanted to drop him off this boarding school so she could focus on her business and not have to raise him, not have to worry about him. And she refused to listen to what he actually wanted. He wanted to play in the rock band, but she is dismissive because they're rich and so he has to be a businessman just like them. So she wants to shove them into this school to brainwash him in order to do that. And when he was actually in trouble and discovered that they were trying to kill people and use him and brainwash him, turn him into an assassin, he couldn't get a hold of his mother because she refused to listen to him. Which, as I said, I actually think a lot of parents, at least in the 90s, I'm not sure if it's still this way, I'm sure it is actually, would refuse to listen to their teenagers and just dismiss them as delinquent behavior even when they had points. Yeah. And yes, I am injecting a lot of my personal experience into this, something that still bothers me even into adulthood. But so maybe that's why I connected with this episode a lot more. And I think, but it also goes against the grain, because as I said, most TV shows and films tend to have this, oh, look at these teenagers, they're delinquent, oh, they're just stupid and they don't know what they're talking about, which I always hate stuff that does that. And I think this is actually a lot more sort of nuanced and intelligent. And it also sort of has the message about not trusting those with power. Because, the parents trusted these school with the power, but they used it for their own corrupt purposes in order to make billions. And so there's commentary there about politicians and people in power trying to affect politics for their own personal gain as well. So, really liked it. Pretty good episode. So, next episode is Trial by Fire. This one stars the guy who played Admiral Layton in the 2-part episode of Deep Space Nine. He was also in Babylon 5 for a little bit, where he plays a president who has just been inaugurated, and apparently aliens come to visit Earth right after his inauguration, so he has to try to deal with this crisis, but none of his staff has been in place yet, so he has to deal with the previous administration staff who all don't like him. And he has to deal with sort of this alien invasion, and they don't know, they're having a hard time communicating, so they don't know how to interpret the aliens' actions. Are they hostile? Are they peaceful? So his advisors, especially the military advisors, kept warning him, saying that the aliens are going to attack, that they should take a more militant, adversarial posture, but he keeps pushing back against that and saying, no, they could be peaceful. And then eventually he gives in to them and saying, okay, because a lot of stuff gets destroyed or whatever, but other scientists saying, oh, there could be possible other explanation. And his wife, by the way, is there begging him to not take any adversarial actions, to remain peaceful. But eventually the military people convince him to take a more militant action, so he launches nuclear weapons. And after he does so, he realizes that the message of the aliens were, in fact, they finally translated, and it was, in fact, one of peace. And because they sent the nuclear weapons, the aliens respond by destroying Washington, D.C. and Moscow, the two, because Russians send nuclear weapons as well, so they destroy the heads of the two places that attacked them. And that's how it ends, with him dying, because he jumped to conclusion and wasn't willing to take a more peaceful Solution. Now, this is the episode I referred to that I actually thought was the premiere episode. I thought this was the first episode of season 2, and in fact, I'm shocked watching this to learn that it's not, because I remember when this episode first came out, I saw a featurette about this episode before it came out, like advertising it. It was like behind the scenes thing, and so, ooh, the same actor, he's no stranger to power because he played the Admiral in Deep Space Nine. Now he's playing the President. And I could have sworn it was like promoting the first episode of the season, but apparently not. And I did see this episode when it first came out. I think Showtime did like one of their free weekends where even non-subscribers could watch it. So and that's why I was also convinced it was the premiere episode. But anyway, apparently I'm wrong. It wasn't the premiere episode. So I had seen this episode before. It's been a while since I've seen it. And yeah, it's good. It's interesting. It's pretty, as I said, I like the dynamic of the president working with an administration that doesn't like him, which is very relevant right now as I record this video. But at least, that leaving administration acknowledged that they lost the election. But anyway, it's still, that was still interesting. And of course, you had your stereotypical military general always like, you gotta attack them. And it's interesting that they turned out to be wrong. And because of that, they're gonna die. But let's be clear here. These aliens weren't exactly, it's kind of their fault. They weren't exactly clear with their intentions. They probably could have done more to make it clear that they were there for peace. And plus, if they're going to kill and destroy the people who are attacking them, really, how peaceful are they? You might say, oh, they're going to be peaceful towards the rest of the world that didn't attack them, but still, they're going to kill. I mean, it's obvious that attack didn't do anything to them, so they're not in any danger. They still could have responded to that attack with peace. I mean, it's not like they're in danger, but whatever. It's your typical dark twist, dun 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 ending. So it's a decent episode. I do like this one. Anyway, I'm gonna have to look this episode up. The next episode is called Worlds Apart. And this episode. So this is one of the episodes I think I might have seen this before. I think I probably just saw parts of it before. It's about an astronaut. It was taking place in the future. An astronaut falls through a wormhole, and he's trapped on this other world, in the ocean, and they're trying to rescue him. And apparently, because there's a time differential, and the president or whatever was his ex-wife, but she's 20 years older than him now, and she's trying to rescue him, and the scientists are saying it's impossible, and he tries to fight off this sea creature in this alien world. And this episode's boring. I didn't really care for it. It didn't really find it interesting. And the one thing that really bothered me about this episode, for being honest, is at the start, he and another woman crashed on the alien world, and she immediately died, and he didn't seem to care. He never even acknowledged the fact. He didn't, once he got onto the raft, he didn't try to look for her. He didn't call out her name. He's like, oh, well, who gives a fuck? She's dead. And she's never mentioned again. And so that really bothered me. Everyone's like, ooh, let's save this guy. And the whole time I'm thinking, this fucker doesn't deserve to be saved, because he just let that woman die and didn't even care. But I don't know. That's just me. Alright, so next episode is The Refuge, and I had definitely not seen this episode before. And this episode's actually really interesting. I really liked it. It sort of starts with the man coming in from the snow, and he has no memories, and he goes to this place where these people are holed up, and they said that the world has ended, an ice age has covered the whole world, and they're sort of holed up in this one place, and you have this one rich guy who's sort of controlling everything and treating everyone like shit. You have people in different roles. You got the doctor, you got a nun, you got this lady that the main dude falls in love with, and then he goes to sleep and wakes up the next day, and everyone else has changed roles except for the rich dude. He's still controlling everything. And everyone, like the woman he's in love with, is now the nun, and someone else is the wife, is now the doctor, and they're just replaying the events that he already saw, but all in different roles. And he realized it's the rich dude's controlling it. And so, eventually he wakes up and finds that they're all sort of in stasis, in animation. They all have terminal diseases, and apparently his disease was cured, and so they brought him out. But he tries to tell everyone that he experienced this dream world where the dude was in control of everything, but no one believes him. He wants to wake the other people up, but they won't let him because the cures haven't been found for their illnesses. So he demands to go back in, so he goes back into hibernation and confronts the rich dude and is able to sort of take over. And because he takes over, the rich dude actually dies in real life, and so he vows to stay in, and they all live happily ever after. And he wants to stay in with the woman he loves, even though it's sort of the stasis dream world. But he's like, what is the dream? Is it really a dream, or is it the out there the dream, or whatever? So it was interesting. It's not perfect, has its issues, of course, but it was a really interesting concept. It was an interesting episode. I mean, there's some questions I have, like how come none of the scientists realized that they were experiencing the shared dream? Like, how could they be completely ignorant of this to the point of not even believing the dude? And how was that guy in control of the dream? And why did he die? Just because the other guy took control? I don't know. So there's a lot of things I just have to go with. But as I said, really interesting concept. So I did actually really enjoy this episode. So next episode is Inconstant Moon. It's got the dude from Family Ties in it, where he's, quaint old dude, and he finds out, like, the moon's all bright, and he's like, why is the moon all bright? And then they find out that he realizes that it's because there's a supernova on the other side of the Earth, and so basically the other side of the Earth that's in daylight is burning, and everyone's dying. And they're just waiting, so as soon as dawn hits, they're going to start burning as well. So he realizes it's the last day on Earth, so he goes and makes moves on this woman that he has a thing for. And she starts to realize he's acting all weird, and a few other people who realize this is going on, they're acting weird as well. So she starts to catch on, and he reveals, the world's coming to an end. And of course she freaks out and gets pissed off at him, and then they bunker down and try to survive. And then the next morning comes, and he realizes it wasn't a supernova, it was just a solar flare. So they actually do manage to survive, but a lot of other people die. I guess, this is made in the 90s, so it's the before the internet and iPhones, because I feel like people would have been able to, if that's the case, the other side of the world was burning, I think people would know it. Like, even in the 90s, although they try to excuse it in this episode by, I think phone lines, and not phone lines, but TVs and any sort of cross communication went down. But yeah, I don't know. It seems to me unlikely that people in the other world would be burning, the whole world, half of the world's on fire, and a lot of people are just not aware of that, except for scientists who can figure it out. I mean, it being the 90s, before the age of the internet and iPhones and whatnot, maybe will explain it, but watching it in this day and era, it's hard to buy that would happen. But it was a quaint episode. Maybe it went on for a bit too long. It started to get less interesting the more it went, and started just retreading. Oh my God, we're gonna die. Okay, I got that. I feel like it might have been better off if this episode was shorter, but it was interesting. A decent episode. Whatever. So, next episode is From Within. This reminds me of like a typical X-Files type episode where these miners get infected with these alien parasites that take them over and make them act like assholes, and they sort of take over their whole town. But Doogie Howser is immune to it because he's mentally challenged. So apparently he's immune to it, and so they try to infect him, and he tries to save them. It's kind of a cliche, boring concept, but I actually kind of liked it. I was actually on board. I think the acting was good. I think the character interactions was good. It managed to keep me engaged, and I like the sort of message that, someone who's mentally challenged, who is dismissed as useless or whatever, is the one who actually managed to save the day. And so I do like that, even though that's kind of cliche in itself, but it was interesting the way it played out here. So, so this episode was decent, too. Next episode is The Heist. Now, this episode in particular reminded me of a very stereotypical low-budget syndicated show. It felt like one of those syndicated action shows that was on for like a year or so before getting canceled. Those seemed really sort of subpar production, let me put it that way. So it's about this militia that hijacks this military shipment because they think it's weapons, but in fact it's like an alien that traps them, and apparently it's like an alien system that makes everyone cold or whatever, and it could kill everyone on Earth, and so they have to try to get rid of it and then try to escape it. And so there's the military person that they captured, and she, and then there's the asshole militia lieutenant and the fucking mercenaries, and they're trying to, so all the inner conflicts with having to deal with these aliens running around. Yeah, as I said, this felt really, really low budget. And the acting wasn't that good, and the production value wasn't that good, and the story was kind of cliche. I mean, it wasn't the worst thing ever, but it was kind of, blah. Wasn't too impressed with this one. So the next one after that is Afterlife. Now, I looked this up, and apparently this is the third highest rated episode on IMDb. And while this episode was good, I don't think it's that good. I mean, I think we've settled down here. It wasn't that great. So it stars Clancy Brown. There can only be one. Clancy Brown's a great actor. He usually plays a villain, but plays a good guy in this episode, which is a nice turn, where he is put on trial and sentenced to death, and it starts out with he's being executed, but instead the military bring him back to life, or not bring him back to life. They never really killed him. They just knocked him out, and they take him to this place and say, hey, if you take place in these experiments, then we won't kill you, but we're going to inject you with alien DNA. Of course, they don't tell him right away. Eventually, he finds out that's what they're doing. So they basically turn him into an alien, and they really mistreat him and hunt him down. They think there's a doctor he thinks sympathetic towards him, but finds out that she's actually tricked him, that she's still working with the military. And they purposely use him for hunting exercises, but then right when they were about to kill him, the actual aliens show up, and the scientist seems to deduce out of nowhere, I don't know how the hell she figured this out, but deduce that the whole reason the aliens sent their DNA or their remnants in the first place was to test the humans to see how they'd handle it, and they failed the test. So they take Clancy Brown back to their planet with them, and I guess there's implications that they're that the humans are kind of fucked now because they failed their test. So it's, as I said, love Clancy Brown, love his acting. Episode did drag a bit, but I did find it pretty interesting. I like the fact that the humans were cast in roles of bad guys and that they failed the test. So it was an interesting episode. I did like it. I don't think it was that great though. I don't think it. There's definitely other Outer Limits episodes, even in these first 2 seasons, that I think are definitely better than this one. So I wouldn't say it's the third best. I think that's a bit crazy, but it's decent. It's good. So anyway, next episode is the Deprogrammers, and this is one of the episodes I'm pretty sure I saw part of this episode before. I think I just saw like the last 20 minutes or something, because when I first started watching this episode, I was like, oh, this is another episode I'd never seen before. But then when it got to the ending, it rang a bell. I was like, oh, okay, I think I had seen this episode before. So it's basically these aliens. It's taking place on like a future where aliens have taken over Earth, and they sort of using humans as indentured servants, and they're like, treated like royalty, and they're all rich and pampered and spoiled, while the humans are slaves. And they're sort of programmed to be slaves, where like they always say, "Me Lord," and so it's about a band of rebel humans who rescue one of the slaves, but of course he's programmed, so they had to deprogram him, so they had to go through all this ordeal where they're like attacking him and then throwing water on him and like doing all this cruel stuff to try to break his programming to see the aliens as different. And they bring in his wife who's in love with them, and they eventually try to convince him that the aliens need to be defeated and they're bad guys, and they eventually do succeed in that. And so the guy goes and pretends to be a slave, returns to his master and kills him, and returns back with his head. And we find out that the rebels were actually working for a rival alien who used them in order to kill his rival. And they're like so the deprogrammer guy is played by Brent Spiner. Data, of course, from Next Generation, and he was great in this role. And it's the one thing I remember. I remember that reveal that after the guy kills the alien, he returns to the rebels. That the reveal that the rebels are actually just pretending to be rebels, and they actually work for the rival alien. When Brent Spiner comes out, and it's like, oh. Everyone will be very pleased, especially my lord. Like, I remember like the way Brent Spiner he's like does the over the top cheesy, especially my lord. That was kind of an over the top reveal, and it's kind of your stereotypical dark reveal of dun dun dun, Outer Limits, dark reveal, dark ending, blah blah blah, and so it ends with the guy who was deprogrammed being reprogrammed by the new master, and his wife being programmed as well, which is quite a very, very dark ending. However, when I think about this episode, I think that it's kind of an analogy, and again, this is very 90s, it's just not as relevant in modern times, but it's a kind of analogy for the U.S. Political system, and how, looking at it from a liberal's perspective, of how they think, Republicans are, have very bad policies that aren't good for people, like that favor the rich and keep the poor poorer, and maybe promote racial injustice. So they look to the Democrats to correct these issues, but then sort of find that the Democrats are just as corrupt as the Republicans. I think I kind of got that message from it, that because the other rebels were sort of representing the Democrats, but then they found out that they're being controlled, they're bought out, or being controlled by the same interests that control the Republican side. And again, as I said, that's more of a 90s thing. It's not really, because there's definitely a much bigger difference between Republicans and Democrats nowadays. And of course, this is looking at it from a liberal's perspective. If you're a conservative, you of course would not at all see it this way. But anyway, that's what I think this episode was getting at, and I thought I do think that was actually an interesting message behind that, even if its relevance kind of went down in time. But I mainly just love Brent Spiner's sort of over the top, especially my lord. I still can't get over that. So I like this one. I thought it was pretty good. Anyway, let's get to the next episode, one I definitely had not seen, never heard of, called Paradise. It's about these old women in nursing homes who suddenly become young and they try to have sex with a man, and then they're like, oh, it didn't work, it failed, and so they get old again and die immediately, like they get too old. And then you find out at the end it's because the apparently when they were young women they met an alien who said, oh, 40 years from now you can give birth to the alien or whatever, but you have to whatever, so it's going to make you young again so you can actually give birth, but if you don't succeed in giving birth then you'll die or whatever. And so the last woman, she actually de-ages with her, who I think it was the brother of her husband, her husband's now deceased, but it was his brother, and how she actually was in love with him, and they de-age together and they have sex, and they're able to produce this alien because they're actually in love. It gets back to that cheesy thing they did in season 1 as well. So love is the answer, which that kind of sentimentality. And so they succeed, but she goes back to being an older woman, and then her daughter, who's the main character in this episode, was unable to give birth or whatever, and now she will be able to raise this alien baby. So it's a happy ending. Woo. Yeah, I don't know. This episode failed to grab me. I don't think it's the worst thing ever. I don't think it was terrible, but it was just kind of, whatever. That's kind of what I think of that episode. It's okay. Fine. Alright, so next episode is the Light Brigade. This is an episode I definitely remember seeing. I think I only saw the end of this episode, but I saw most of it, enough to know what was going on. So this is the first kind of sequel that we have in the Outer Limits, because this is a sequel to The Quality of Mercy in Season 1. If you saw my Season 1 review, I actually really liked that episode. It's the one with Robert Patrick, where he was in a prison cell captured by these aliens that humans are at war with in the future. And he was with a teenage woman who apparently was actually an alien. She got the information out of him. And in this episode, you see Robert Patrick again, and they're trying to play it off like he was a rescued POW, and they even have him have a robotic hand, which is a callback to the first episode because he got his hand chopped off. But you find out at the end that he's actually not Robert Patrick, is an alien in disguise. And so they're on, it's all about Wesley Crusher, Will Wheaton, who's playing a cadet, of course he is, and they're on a mission to the alien world to destroy it in order to win the war, and they have this weapon of mass destruction, but they get attacked, and everyone's dead except for Wesley and Robert Patrick and 2 other people. And they're trying desperately to get this weapon back online. And at the very end, like Wesley, everyone else dies, and Wesley's in a battle with Robert Patrick. Once he's revealed as the alien, he finally manages to launch the weapon of mass destruction, only to find that Robert Patrick had turned the ship around without their knowledge, and instead of being at the alien homeworld, they were at Earth, and he just destroyed the Earth. Dun, dun, dun. No, I think this it's a decent episode. Don't get me wrong. It is sometimes these dark twist endings are a bit too like, all right, you're just doing this to be dark and twisty, but it's it was effectively dark. It was definitely interesting. It was really cool seeing this storyline that was started in Equality of Mercy continued, but things only get even worse as the whole human race is wiped out this time. So, yeah, this human beings can't catch a break in this storyline. So, but yeah, so it was a decent episode. I like this one. Anywho, after that, next episode is Falling Star. It's about a has-been musician who was once had a great career, but she was once a huge pop star, but now she's playing tiny clubs, and she's becomes an alcoholic, and apparently she had originally committed suicide, but there was the time traveler from the future, and apparently in the future people are allowed to travel back in time into people's bodies, but they're only supposed to observe. They're not supposed to actually affect the timeline, but she does, as she actually saves the woman's life, and that changes the timeline. So you have these time cops from the future who come back and try to restore the timeline, so they try to kill the woman, and they end up just causing more havoc. And apparently, like, the future is a dark, dim, dismal place with no art, no culture, but because this one has-been pop artist survives, she changes the future to make it bright and beautiful, and they all appreciate great music. See, this is kind of the silly Bill and Ted thing where one musician can save the whole world and save the future. I'm sorry, music wasn't even that good. It was like really cheesy 80s music. I mean, just because she died, the whole future is like devoid of art. Come on, there are plenty other artists. There's hundreds, thousands of other artists, musicians, painters, writers, all sorts of art. It's absolutely ridiculous to hinge the entire future being abysmal because of one average 80s pop star. Come on. But I mean, the storyline was somewhat interesting though with the time travelers, and it was a kind of an interesting character story where the woman actually turned her life around for being a suicidal. But overall, yeah, I just couldn't buy the main storyline, so it was just okay. It was okay. So next episode is called Out of Body. It features Ross from Frasier. God, I'm surprised I remember her. And she's playing it's that stereotypical cliche storyline that I mentioned at the Outer Limits does a lot, where it's set in contemporary times, where it's about a scientist who has this experiment and other people don't like it, and in this case it's about her trying to like sort of separate the soul, although she doesn't call the soul, but it's trying to like separate like the essence of a human being and be out of body. But there's a religious fanatic who doesn't take kindly to this, who's played by the cigarette smoking man, and I kept screaming like, put a cigarette in your mouth. God damn it, where's your fucking cigarette? The smoking guy from the X-Files. Anyway, he plays a religious fanatic that kind of fucks up the experiment, and as he has a mole who is the lab assistant who fucks it up, and something goes wrong, and she's trapped out of body, and she's trying to get her attention of her husband the whole time, and eventually her husband goes to realizes, finally, it takes him long enough to realize what happened. I mean, it's obvious because she got put in this condition when she was running the experiment at our lab. I mean, how couldn't he just figure it out that she's out of body? But whatever. So he eventually does it, but then the lab assistant fucks that up as well, and so they're both trapped out of body, and their physical bodies die, and they fade into the afterlife, whatever, together. That's really cheesy. And this episode took such a long time to get to the point. Most of it was just her going out of body, going, look, oh, hi, I'm here. And it got so repetitive, so boring. And the ending was just not worth it. I didn't feel like it justified anything. It wasn't good payoff. It was just a useless, boring episode. Absolutely hated it. Anyway. We get into the next episode, which is Vanishing Act, and I'm really surprised I had not seen nor heard of this episode before because it was awesome. Absolutely loved it. In fact, I kind of assumed going into this rewatch that I had seen most of the good episodes, because most of the good episodes they would have shown on these syndication reruns, because as I said, they seem to be showing the same episodes over and over again, or they would be on one of these DVD collections that I had seen. But this episode somehow slipped through the cracks. I hadn't even heard of this one before. So it starts in 1949, New Year's Eve, and a guy gets in a car accident while he's out getting a bottle of wine, and he comes home the next day to find out 10 years had passed, and his wife was like, "Where the fuck have you been 10 years? Why did you abandon me?" He's like, "What are you talking about? It was just the night before." And he goes to sleep, and another 10 years has passed, and now he has a son, and she's like, "Oh, you abandoned me again, you're absentee father, you're an asshole." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I just woke up the next day." And then he goes in the bathroom to take a pee, and then he gets knocked out, and another 10 years have passed, and now they're finally catching on, okay, something's going on, because now they're finally realizing that he's not aging at all. Like 30 years has passed and he's the same age, and so they try to help him out and find out what's going on. But then he goes to sleep, and another 10 years have passed, and I think by now we're into 1990, where his wife is an old woman, his son is an adult, and they try to figure out what's going on. So he goes under hypnosis, and then they find out this alien symbiote entered him in order to experience what it's like to be a human being. The problem is that they take him back to their home world through a wormhole every night to share their experience. But this wormhole, of course, is because of relativity, 10 years have passed on Earth, but no time has passed for him, so they return him to Earth. And these aliens have no concept of linear time. Reminds me of like the wormhole aliens from Deep Space Nine, so they don't understand what they're doing to him. And so his wife explains it to them, that what they're doing, and so they take him back to his point of origin in 1949, and he gets to live things right, which reminds me a lot of The Visitor from Deep Space Nine. And it's very similar in that regard, where a guy keeps getting knocked through time and experiences this alternate future, but then at the end he gets to start right back at the origin point, retaining the memories, but no one else has the memories. And this came out the same year as The Visitor. It came out a little bit after, just a few months after, so don't know. Don't know what's going on with that. But, it's different enough from The Visitor, because The Visitor was about a father and son and the love they had for each other. With this, it does bring up his son, but he doesn't even have a son when this all starts. It's more about his love with his wife. And so, yeah, it's different enough, but it is really similar in some regards. So I wouldn't call it a direct ripoff, but it is similar. But it's really good. Like, it was really riveting and engaging, and that's a really interesting concept to have. I think maybe the woman was being a bit obtuse, especially, like when 10 years passed, you can kind of understand it, but when 20 years passed, it took her a bit long to figure out that he didn't age at all. I mean, come on, 20 years, and he looks exactly the same, but whatever. And it was kind of convenient that the hypnotist managed to figure out what was going on with him, but it was still really fascinating storyline. I absolutely love this episode. I thought, and it was really powerful. Maybe not as powerful as The Visitor, but still powerful in that regard, where because these aliens have no concept of linear time, they're able to take him back to the point of origin, and he gets to live his life correctly after seeing this possible future. And it does show how disorientating this was for him, to constantly, every morning he wakes up, 10 years have passed. I mean, that is a really horrific scenario. And it's interesting that because these aliens were completely oblivious to it, because they have no concept of linear time and just how damaging, how it basically destroyed this man's life because of it. So that was, yeah, I love it. I love this episode. Now, I don't know why this wasn't on the time travel compilation, because there was a DVD that had 6 episodes about time travel. This episode should have been on it. Like, A Stitch in Time was on it, which of course it should be. And there was a couple other good episodes, which I'll get to later in the season, that were on it. But there were like 2 or 3 really terrible episodes that were on that DVD. Like the one about Gettysburg, which was dumb. And there's this one that was supposed to be a backdoor pilot about these time-traveling cops or whatever. And that was really stupid. They should have got rid of one of those and put this one on it. But I bet you their reasoning was, well, it was not actually time travel, because it's more about these aliens who... It's more about relativity, about these aliens who take them through a wormhole. But he does time travel at the end, because they put him back into 1949, that's clearly time travel. So I think it's time travel enough, and the fact that it's a much, much better episode than those other crap they had on there. Really, this should have been on that DVD. I feel robbed. I should have seen this episode already, because it should have been on that DVD, but whatever. And I do think this is in the top 5 on IMDb of highest rated episodes, which it definitely deserves to be. Because yeah, I loved it. I think this episode was absolutely amazing. On the other hand, it is nice to, during this rewatch, to have such an amazing episode that I'm seeing for the very first time. So that is good. So yeah, that was a great episode. So now we'll get into the final episode of the season, the big finale, The Sentence. Now, the episode, 2 episodes before, had Ross from Frasier. This one has Niles from Frasier, where he plays, again, a scientist who has experimental technology. And while this is not like modern times, it's like the near future. It's supposed to be like 10 years from then, so I guess like 10 years ago from now. But where they come up with this technology to they can implant memories inside an inmate's head. Someone who's sentenced to, a murderer who is had a life sentence in prison. Instead, they can put them in this chair and inject the time period so that they feel like a lot of time has passed when they were in prison. And yes, that premise is so goddamn similar to the Deep Space Nine episode Hard Time. In fact, as I said, this came out the same year as season 4 of Deep Space Nine. In fact, Hard Time, I believe, came out just a few months before this episode did. So they're really close together, and the concept is really similar. And honestly, I like this better than Hard Time, because I don't think Hard Time was all that great. I have a lot of issues with that. Apparently, some people love that episode, but I have a lot of issues with that, personally, having to do with how its message about PTSD was really undercut by the fact that O'Brien is perfectly fine in the next episode. And also, like, that form of punishment doesn't make any sense in the context of that episode, whereas this episode, this form of punishment does make sense, because it's meant to sort of reform the convict. But then Niles, of course, what happens is they put an innocent man under, and it has bad effects that could risk his life, because it's not meant to work on someone who's innocent, which that's quite a huge oversight. Someone's being really obtuse and not really realizing how damn flawed our judicial system is in the United States. And I think it's no accident that the innocent man in question happens to be an African-American man, who is wrongfully, charged with murder, and he just assumes, so he assumes he's guilty. When he keeps coming in, says, I'm innocent, they're like, yeah, whatever, and he turns out he is innocent, and it puts his life in danger. So Niles goes in after him and tries to save his life, but it's too late, and the guy dies, and then Niles gets arrested for murdering him. So he has to go to prison. Now here, again, this is another example of the Outer Limits episode where the twist was fucking obvious. I mean, I can't believe that there would be anyone who could not see this twist ending coming from a million miles away. As soon as this happens, I'm like, oh yeah, Niles is still in the machine, so he's going to experience 20 years in prison, and then at the end he's going to wake up and find that he's a young man back again, who actually just experienced the machine. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So most of this episode, I was just like waiting for that to happen, just going through the paces of him being in prison, being treated like shit. I'm like, can we get to the part where he wakes up and he's still in the machine? So they finally get to that at the end, and Niles wants to destroy the machine. He starts like, because when he wakes up, the senator that was trying to approve whether or not they'd use the technology, he's like, yeah, I approve, we're gonna start using this technology everywhere. And Niles loses his shit and starts destroying the machine and going, no, because, and of course the moral is that technology is not a good idea, and that it's just a way to sort of punish. It's cruel and unusual punishment, and he, at first, he's totally on board, but once he experiences it himself, he realizes how cruel it is. And also, his assistant points out that Niles didn't have the reaction of an innocent man, meaning that he's not innocent, because he was using the machine on other prisoners, and the machine is cruel and unusual, therefore he's guilty. Interesting concept. So it's a decent episode. I mean, it was far too predictable, and it did drag on too long because you knew where this was headed, and I was just waiting for them to get there. But it was an interesting conclusion, and yeah, quite an interesting episode, and I did actually like it better than Hard Time. Anyway. So that's it. That's all the episodes of Season 2 of The Outer Limit. So now, as always, it's time for me to name the worst episode of the season and the best episode of the season, in my opinion. So as for worst episode, we had a lot of contenders for that, such as Unnatural Selection, the one with the genetically engineered babies, First Anniversary, the hot women who are actually ugly aliens, Mind Over Matter, the one with Mark Hamill trying to go into a woman's mind where it's obvious that it was just a machine tricking him. Beyond obvious, there's Out of Body, one with Ross trying to be, I'm out of body. But for the worst episode, I'm definitely going to have to give this to It's a Fake! I mean, Beyond the Veil, where the only enjoyment I got out of that episode is repeating, It's a Fake! It was such a poorly done episode. The plot made no sense. The twist ending was stupid. It made no difference. It's not how a mental institution would behave. It's not how any characters would act. It was like too dark and horrific. It was so contrived that like there's no real life. A mental institution would not be that dark and horrific. And the storyline just was just really poorly constructed, poorly conceived. It's just a terrible, terrible episode. So, it's a fake! Anyway, as for the best episode of the season, as I said, there's a lot of great episodes, so a lot of contenders for this one. As well, there's Resurrections, the post-apocalyptic future with all the androids resurrecting a human being. There's Straight and Narrow, the one with the teenager who goes to boarding school that tried to brainwash him into becoming an assassin. Trial by Fire, the one with Admiral Layton being the president dealing with the aliens coming to Earth. The Refuge, which deals with the weird sort of dream-like state that comes in being in stasis, where the guy keeps changing everyone's roles. The Deprogrammers with Brent Spiner saying, especially my lord. And the Light Brigade with Wesley Crusher and Robert Patrick. Where humanity's always fucked in these ones. All fucked. Vanishing Act, very, 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 very close runner-up. Of course, the time traveling one, the guy keeps waking up and finding himself 10 years in the future. And in the other season, particularly if this was in season 1, that would have been my choice for best episode, and probably some of the future seasons as well. However, because it was season 2, there was another episode that was even better, and that is the best episode of season 2, A Stitch in Time. As I said, this may in fact be the best episode of the entire show. With Michelle Forbes and Amanda Plummer having the time traveler go back and kill murderers before they commit murders. Now, I think I forgot to mention when I covered this episode earlier in the video that this is kind of a precursor to Minority Report, which came out a bit later than this, or at least the movie did. And this episode is way better than Minority Report. Just throwing that out there, because Minority Report is kind of dumb. It's like, because they use precogs to predict, I'm going to kill someone before they kill someone, which is like, that's really questionable, and the movie explored that. But this is different. This is about actually using time travel to after people were murdered, so you know for a fact that they're going to murder people, and the weird psychological effect that has on the user. And it's an interesting use of time travel, by the way. Another thing I forgot to mention is that this is type 2 time travel, where the type 1, type 2, type 3. Type 2 is where there's a singular timeline, and this is the most common use of time travel in fiction, is type 2, where there's a singular timeline. If you go back in time, you change and alter that singular timeline so that if the original timeline that you came from no longer exists, because now it's replaced by the new timeline. And so in order to correct it, you have to go back in time and fix the timeline to get the timeline back where it used to be. But what they did with that in this episode that was original is that the time traveler themselves, when they returned to an altered present, they remembered both the original timeline and the altered timeline, which was different than, say, like Back to the Future, because when Marty McFly returned to the altered 1985, where his father was like a rich, successful man, and Biff was like sniveling, cleaning his car and stuff, and his siblings were all successful too, Marty McFly had no memory of this. He only remembered the original timeline, which does make me wonder how he's going to function in this timeline that he has no memories of. But in this episode, the time traveler did remember the new timeline as well as the original one, and that's part of what drove them insane, especially Amanda Plummer, who did it so many times, where she had so many different timelines in her head that was driving her crazy, which I thought was a very interesting concept, and it really added an extra layer to this episode, which, again, as I mentioned, brilliant commentary on victims of sexual abuse, and it's just a powerful episode all around. So it's just one of my favorite sci-fi time traveler stories, period, as far as episodes and shows and movies and whatnot. It's just top notch. So my rating for season 2 of The Outer Limits as a whole, I'm going to give, out of 10, I'm going to give this an 8. Extremely good. So I do think it is better than season 1, even though it arguably has, I don't know, I think it has just as many bad episodes as season 1. Maybe some of the bad episodes are worse than the bad episodes of season 1, but it has more great episodes as well. There's a lot more episodes, and maybe I feel this way because I'm watching them for the first time. That could have an effect on it. But there's a lot more episodes I gave an 8 to this season that I think that just really worked, and there's a lot of like good episodes as well that I would give a 7 to. So even though there was a lot of misses, I think there were more hits, and the hits that hit better. Like it had a couple of 10s, like the Stitch in Time and Vanishing Act, both amazing episodes. It's definitely not enough to warrant a 9, but yeah, it is better than season 1. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for season 2. So that is it for my review of season 2 of The Outer Limits. I shall return in a month to cover season 3 of The Outer Limits, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. Also check out my channel as I cover many other shows such as Discovery, The Expanse, Star Trek, Breaking Bad, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.